listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Frederick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text. I am Michael Halcomb. I'm here with the Sensei himself, J. M. Smith, always ready to jump in and do some training here. This is 10 questions where we ask 10 questions about a verse of scripture in an effort to show you kind of what we do in our own study of scripture and the curiosity we bring, the observations we make, the questions we raise. All this is real time. None of this is scripted. Neither of us have looked at these verses. Literally, I just pick a verse and we go. We don't spend any time beforehand discussing any of this, planning anything out. It's all real time. So you're getting to see us do actual study in real time. And if you want to engage us in this, you can comment on Spotify or YouTube or Facebook, other social handles, wherever this is shared. So please do that. We'd love to hear your questions and your observations. So JM, I got a verse fired up here and ready to go. And for those of you that are watching, you'll see it on the screen right about now. And for those of you who are listening, we'll read this out loud. This is a short verse, so maybe a little challenging to get 10 questions out of this, but I think we can do it. This is another really common one. It's 1 Peter 5:7, and it says, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. All right. You want me to lead this one off?
Yeah, I think it's your turn.
All right. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. So I'm interested about the notion of, the word cast, because when I read that, it makes me immediately think of fishing, like casting a fishing line. And so it comes from this verb, epiripto. Is it just literally doesn't mean to throw on, or is it cast? Like what is the context from which this word comes? What is the realm from which this word comes? It's Sitzumleben, perhaps we could say. I don't know. It's setting in life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. How much Peter the fisherman are we hearing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Is this a fishing related term or not?
Mm-hmm. Well, my first question would center on this same term. In the Greek, I believe this is a participle.
Yes.
Casting. It's not a command, whereas in NIV, it's a command. Cast all your anxiety. So if it's a participle, it assumes that you're doing that as part of whatever else he's talking about. At least that's how it reads to me on first glance. So I would want to see what else is included, if anything else that he's talking about us doing sheds more light on what it looks like, this casting.
Yeah, that's really good. Pointing out that that's a participle, really an aorist participle nonetheless, like after casting all your cares. Yeah, that's really good. Or anxieties. And so that brings me to the word all, which starts the sentence pasan.
Mm-hmm.
All your anxiety or all your care, however we want to translate that. Is this a command? Is this a suggestion? Like, do we have to cast all? Like, do we bring every every care or anxiety to him? Like all of them, from little to big? Are there some cares or anxieties that don't need to be casted on to him? So all. I mean, is that even possible to cast all? I'm whenever I see these sort of absolute kind of words like all,
Hmm.
it it's kind of a red flag to me. Like scriptural speaking, these like holistic, absolute kind of terms, which sometimes seem very unrealistic. like, um, so is it possible even? So
Hmm.
what is all like literal, or is it
Like all
like
kinds
just
of, or, yeah.
yeah, all kinds of like? Is it just suggestive? Like, what is all doing here?
Hmm. Well, my next question would be, I would want to know whether this is translated as anxiety, merimnon, or
Mm-hmm.
care, because those are two very different things. As somebody who, I'm pretty open about this on my own channel and social media, I've had anxiety, like the clinical, since I was college, and I've been on medication for decades for anxiety. It runs in my family,
Mm.
general anxiety disorder, and nothing except medication actually helped me live a functional life for years. So when I read the word anxiety, immediately I start to think, okay, that
Mm.
word gets misused a lot, or used, I guess not misused, gets used in a general sense versus a clinical sense.
Oh wow.
And so for somebody who suffers from anxiety, is this verse an encouraging verse, or is this a condemning verse because they are still wrestling with their anxiety, and they're saying, how do I
Ooh.
cast my anxiety if my mind is running a million miles an hour, my heart's racing, and I feel dread creeping in? How am I supposed to cast that on the Lord? It sounds very Christianese if this is read as talking about a disease, anxiety disorder. Whereas if it's talking about care, that seems to make a little more sense of like general trepidation, general cares, general concerns versus very
Right.
specific anxiety. So I would want to see how that term is used elsewhere in scripture.
Wow. Very, very interesting. My third question, simple. Cast all your anxiety. Uh, is the is the fact that I mean your in English can be singular or plural,
Hmm.
and so I don't know. I guess my simple question is the singular or plural? But I kind of just want to make the point that uh, we have the your in Greek is plural. So what do we do with that if we've tended to read this as if it's talking about individuals like singular?
Hmm.
How does that change things knowing that the your is plural here?
Hmm. Let's see. Is this number two or three?
Yep, this is your third. Yep.
Third. So I just backed up to the verse before because my first question made me want to know what came right before this, since it's a participle. And this is verse 7 talking about how you do verse 6. In other words, if what's being
Oh.
said in verse 6, humble yourselves under God's mighty hand in order that he may lift you up, casting your anxiety. Like, is that how you humble yourself under God's mighty hand? And if so, what does this even talk about general worry and care versus a very specific trusting in God uh, for our spiritual provision and even our physical provision.
Right.
Yeah, I would want to kind of probe the text there, how these two verses go together, and is this one thought in Greek?
Yeah, very good. Um, I would ask the same question, except my fourth question then is verse 8 how you do verse 7. So you
Mm,
asked, is verse 6 how you do verse 7? I'm
right.
curious, is verse 8 how you do verse 7? What's really fascinating is verse 6 starts with this verb, right? This plural imperative, and so does verse 8. They both start with plural imperatives. In fact, 8 has two plural imperatives right in a row. And so, which one is 7 most closely linked to? Is
Mm.
it 6 or 8? Yeah, so that participle, we do some wrestling there. So that's my fourth question. I kind of cheated and just recycled your question, but yeah,
Wow,
that was my
that's
fourth one.
man, that's a good one too. Um, hopefully viewers, listeners, watchers are seeing like how important it is to not stop with what we're doing, which is just looking at one verse.
Right,
Seeing that
exactly.
every verse is within a thought.
Yeah.
My question would be, oops, I'm on the wrong verse here. Um, Casting all your care or anxiety upon him, for he cares for you. What does that mean? He cares for you, because it's not the same word as your. I don't think it is the same word as cast all your cares upon him. Like it works in English as a
Hmm.
word play,
Right.
but in Greek, I mean, they both start with mu, but other than that, I don't know if the
Yeah.
words are related. So, what does it
Yeah.
mean, God's care for you? Um, like, what kind of care are we talking about? Like tender, loving care, or just, yeah, I care about that, along with a bunch of other stuff. Um,
Yes. Very good. Um, my my last question is a recycling of my earlier question, which we were looking at pasantein merim non humon, that plural you cast all your plural y'all cast all your anxiety, or after y'all cast your all your anxieties, that whatever.
mm,
The last word of the verse is also a plural you, because
mm,
he cares for y'all,
right.
right? And so then how does again that maybe change our understanding of what's being said when we look at, it's not that he's caring for you as an individual, but it's a collective you, a plural you. He cares for y'all. Um,
Mm.
yeah. So how does that change things? And who is the y'all? Like, is it us readers? Is it very specific to this context? Who's the y'all here?
Mm.
Yeah. So
All
very
right.
good. Yeah, like I think I might have mentioned this in an earlier episode where we are doing 10 questions, but I think it was a little Gregory Kukul. He's an apologist, Christian apologist. Greg Kukul. He wrote a book like a decade and a half ago. It's really just like a pamphlet titled "Never Read a Verse of Scripture."
Mm.
And I don't know if you can still find that online or not, but um, I think to your point, JM, that you brought up in the middle of this, hopefully, people who are viewing this or listening don't just stop at a verse, kind of like we're doing, but realize it's situated within a literary context, right? In a cultural context,
Hmm.
and so you got to read what comes before and what comes after, and after you've started looking at a single verse, connecting it to the surrounding verses, um, and making those connections. So that's a really good rule of thumb. Never
Yeah.
read a verse of scripture that is in isolation. Never read a verse of
Yeah.
scripture in isolation. Uh,
Uh,
I did hear, I heard this. So I've been going through this curriculum with my two high school kids by uh, uh, Dr. Chris. I think it's Yuang. I think it's Chris Yuang, but he runs this. I talked about this on an earlier episode of the podcast this week. He runs this thing called Holy Sexuality. And it's a
hmm.
curriculum. It's amazing. And I'm working through that with my two high school kids right now. Me and my wife are. We're about finished. But he talks about when he's given his testimony. He was very active in the homosexual lifestyle and very into drugs and went to prison for a long time. And
Hmm.
um, when he was laying on his prison bunk one night on the bottom, he looks up and right above him it said something like "bored?" question mark. Read Jeremiah 29:11.
Hmm.
And so, that's for I know the plans I have for you. And we often hear that verse taken out of context. But the way Chris Yuan tells his testimony is and he's the first person I've ever heard do this. He explained the context being about these sort of wayward Israelites who had strayed from God and turned their back on God. And he said, I realized that if if God can love and redeem a wayward group of people who have turned from Him, then He can also do the same for me.
Hmm.
And so it was really interesting to hear him how that one verse like just changed his entire life and
Yeah.
set him on an incredible trajectory. And so I don't want people to think that what we're doing here is like beating up on people that maybe are using drawing on a verse or have a life verse or use a verse in isolation. We're trying to beat up on people. We're just saying we really need to do like what Dr. Yuan did, is understand the context in which this verse is said, and then we get so much more of the story. Um, and then I think with the bigger story, we're able to connect the dots of our lives
Yeah.
back into that story or immerse ourselves back into that story. Um, I don't know. You have any thoughts about that
Yeah.
before we
Yeah.
sign off?
No, I can absolutely piggyback right on that and say, even when the New Testament authors quote a verse, and they do, I mean, there weren't verses back then. They would just quote a phrase or a part of a passage, which what we would consider a verse. Even when the New Testament authors do that, you see by how they're using it, and this is where good commentaries, New Testament commentaries that are immersed in the Old Testament point this out. They are using it in its context. Like they're keying in on a verse or a passage, but they have in mind the whole story. So like Jesus, the
Right.
example I use in my own teaching at Disciple Dojo is when Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's not all he's saying. He's saying basically crying out Psalm 22. Like he's crying out the first verse of the psalm. And when you read through the whole context, you see why he keys in on that verse. And also it makes sense of the situation he's going through. That's a great example with Jeremiah 29:11 of how to properly use that single verse is note the context, get the teaching that contextually it's trying to communicate, which is exactly what he realized, and then
Mm-hmm.
use that as your daily impetus in your own spiritual journey. So that's a
Yeah.
great example. I have one more question though, because you started, right?
Okay.
I have one
Okay. I
more, and
didn't
I got to
realize
ask
that.
you
Sorry.
this.
Go.
I got to ask you this because I got a Greek professor here. My my last question is, what is the nuance of epi in this, or ep, upon, cast your
Mm,
care upon? How do you cast? Like, I mean, I know how to throw something on somebody, But how does that work when it comes to something like care or anxiety? And since epi, we, at least when I took Greek, we learned it has so many meanings based on what
That's
the
right.
case that follows it is, and this is accusative. So is this talking about like location, like upon, at? Um, Even then, is it just
Among.
a saying? Not a saying. Is this just a metaphor, or is there a way that we actually can do this? So those are the questions. That's the question I would wrestle with. But I would want to know. I would sometimes prepositions aren't exciting, but I would
Yeah.
sometimes they make a huge difference. And yeah, so I'd want to do more work, more study on epi here.
That's an excellent question. The the force and intent of epi. You made me think. I'm a pastor myself, but I've been in church a long time, and I've often heard other pastors say this kind of thing where, when you come to church on Sunday morning, it's about God. Leave your baggage at the door, and you come in and focus on God. And I've always been really put off by that. Like, I would
Yeah,
think that you're supposed to bring all the baggage in and throw it upon God, or sit it among God, or sit it among
yeah,
God's people. Um, so you've made me think about that too.
mm.
There's even a song. I don't know if it's Corey Asbury, but there's a Christian song that says as much. Um, the Father's House. Do you know this song?
I
Check
don't.
your shame at the door. Do you
Uh-uh.
know that song? Check your
I
shame at the
don't. But
door.
I
It ain't welcome.
confess I'm unfamiliar with
Yeah.
most modern Christian,
Okay.
unless it's from
Well,
20 years ago when
anyways,
I was in
my
college.
daughter my daughter is an avid K-Love fan, right? And so I
Uh,
hear this K-Love nonstop. Like,
yeah,
but there's a line in this song where he says, "Check your shame at the door. It ain't welcome anymore when you're in the Father's house." And
mm.
I'm like, I don't really understand that. Like, uh, are we really to check our shame? Like, to leave it? Like, it seems like something we should cast
Yeah,
upon God, but or cast before God. Maybe Epi could have that sense. Um,
yeah.
so that's a great question. What is Epi doing here?
Maybe he's
Yeah,
using it
thanks for
like a
bringing that up.
coat check, like you check your coat, like you give it to the person. So I'm trying
And then
to
you pick it back up.
give the benefit
Yeah.
of the doubt, like you hand your shame to God as you enter. I don't know.
But when you check your coat, you pick it up on the way back out.
That's true. That's true. So yeah, don't
You know?
check it.
So,
Oh man,
uh, well, good stuff, man. Well, sorry, I forgot you had an extra question left. Thanks for reminding
you're
me.
just
But
trying to stiff me. I know how you are. I see how it is.
check
Jeez.
your fifth question at the door. Uh, yeah. Well, good stuff. Good stuff. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We hope this is enjoyable to you. I love these sessions, dude. I'm
Yeah,
so
man.
glad. It's good to just sit down with another believer and just ask questions. So fun to me. So enjoyable. And we hope the same is true for you. Hey, go over to Disciple Dojo. Check that out. Check out the YouTube page, Grown Ups Table on Facebook. Check out glowshouse.com and like this episode, share it to your heart's content. Even more, join in with us. What observations you got? What questions you have? We'd love to hear that. So that's it for now. Until next time, we hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glow's House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glow's House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glowsahouse.com today. Glowsa House, language resources for the global community.